Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Let's go to Australia and talk about AI, shall we? AI and pandemics. What a combination. This is not a conversation that I have the faintest idea what we will actually wind up discussing, except that it's going to be fun. We are going to Sydney, Australia, to meet Professor Enrico Coiera. And Professor Coiera is the director of the Center for Health Informatics, which is a big word that I halfway understand, Australian Institute of Health Innovation, and Foundation Professor in Medical Informatics of Macquarie University. He was trained in medicine with a computer science PhD in artificial intelligence, and he has done research in industry and academia. So, hello, it's good morning to you. I think it's night for us. Good morning,
Professor. It's lunchtime for us. Hi there.
And much closer to home in Ottawa is Dr. Ronald St. John, who is by now a dear old friend because I call on him every time I need to talk to somebody about pandemics. And he is an expert on pandemics. He was the Pan American epidemiology expert, or the head of epidemiology for Pan America for the World Health Organization, and he was in charge of Canada's response to the SARS epidemic back when, and he certainly knows his way around a virus or two. And here in Toronto is my assistant, Adam Wynn, whom I lean on every day for one thing or another. And by the way, just getting over COVID. So is he. He just tested negative today for the first time. So we are both on the mend and now have firsthand experience with epidemiology, and on the wrong end of the experience, I'm afraid. So I am delighted to meet Professor Coiera in particular because it's time for me to get smart about artificial intelligence, and I find it quite a daunting prospect. I every now and then try to watch something about this new thing, ChatGPT. Is that what it's called? And
that's right. Yeah,
it seems to be taking over the world, and I've got to learn it and figure it out. But I don't know. I'm kind of scared of it. So, Professor Coiera, how about telling us, and by the way, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You are doing a pretty good job, Meta. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, if you don't mind, I'd like for you to just get me smart in about 1 hour about what is this thing called artificial intelligence.
I'm glad we've got an hour, but I might need 5. So artificial intelligence is a very loaded term, and different people will think of different things when they hear it. Many people think of the Terminator and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that is something known as AGI, or artificial general intelligence. The idea that an AI would be sentient and have autonomy, and that is something that is coming. Some people are saying it's a few years away. Some people saying we're nowhere near doing that. I remain agnostic. But what we normally mean when we talk about AI is a set of tools and methods that computer scientists have built that just help us automate the way we make decisions. So finding things that people would do, like listen to speech. If you're used to Siri, there's AI there listening to your speech and converting it into information. In healthcare, we might be looking at your test results, your signs and symptoms, and diagnosing you. We might be suggesting treatment recommendations based on your genetic profile. So the AI, using something called machine learning, will look at data, will try and bring together patterns about what is associated with an outcome or a diagnosis. And the newer generation technologies, which have taken over in the last 5 to 7 years, are called deep learning. And that refers to the use of what we call neural networks, which are not really models of human brains, but were loosely modeled against them in the early days. And so these are big networks that sort of connect together different ideas. And like neurons, there's different weightings, etc., between them. And so training those networks can take, huge chunks of data, huge energy resource if we're worried about things like climate change. We can talk about that at some point. But so think about AI simply as ways of doing things smartly, and either assisting humans, which is what my preferred model is for healthcare, or sometimes replacing humans. A good example of replacement might be, let's think of mammogram screening. It's something that we like to do, but it's increasingly hard to find humans to read all those thousands of mammograms. And it turns out most of them are normal anyway. So an AI would do something like screen all the obviously normal ones out, throw them away, and reserve those that are somehow concerning to have a reading with the human and the AI together. And that is of an efficiency, and no harm is done. You test it to make sure that it's doing the right thing. But for example, our team is working on melanoma treatment. The last few years have been remarkable for melanoma. It's gone from being an untreatable cancer to one where we have these new immune drugs, checkpoint inhibitors, which really for some patients are a miracle and cure them. But
how recently? Because this is news to me. I've had friends
Right.
who've had melanoma and more like 10 years ago. So are you saying something shorter period than that, more recently?
That's right. They've been in development for a long time, but they've only been, and maybe Ronald will know more about it than I do, but only the last 5 to 7 years have they been widely available. And there are different generations of the drugs. The early generations of the drugs were very hit and miss, and they only work on certain people. So if you've got certain genetic markers, you're more likely to respond to a drug than others. So the task we have is to find which drug is best suited to you, because A, we want you to be cured, and B, we know the wrong drug can have toxic effects on some people. Trying to work out through your genetic profile and other biomarkers which patient is going to respond best to which drug is the task we have with the AI. And so we're finding as much data as we can about patients and trying to discover what the patterns are. So this is where the biology lags what the AI can discover. It'll find patterns that we maybe don't understand why it is the case that things work or not, and then the biology will follow. So it's a very different example of using AI. Again, no Terminator, no Schwarzenegger, but just some very smart tools to help us do things. Is that a good start at a very high level?
It's a good start, but you've also triggered a question in my mind, because I actually have another friend who is, some people have called him the father of the new AI, because back 50 years ago, Paul Werbos was a PhD student at Harvard, and he wrote a paper on something called backpropagation, which is apparently the basis for the neural network analysis, but people didn't use it until the last few years, and then they, I guess, figured out how to use it. So when you talk about deep learning, that's neural network things? And
it is. So yeah, you use the right term, backpropagation. So that is the mechanism for teaching the network. And even when I was completing my doctoral work in the 80s, that shows you how old I am, those methods were being used, but the computer power to do it was very limited. So we would tend to build networks with very few neurons and very few layers of neurons, just simply because the computers couldn't do it. And also we just didn't have enough.
You call them neurons? You're actually trying to mimic the structure of a brain?
Well, that's how it started, as I said, but it's no longer the case that that there's much correlation. Although some of the pioneers of deep learning are saying we need to put more human architecture back into the designs of what we do. But what happened in about 10 years ago, two big things. One was on the back of video games. So people started to need to build really fast computer chips to play video games, all those things you see. And they turned out to be perfect for teaching neural networks. They were really fast. So all of a sudden we had computing power, and companies like Google had big warehouses full of computers called server farms with a lot of spare resource. So for the first time, we had access to massive computing power. And the other big thing that happened in healthcare especially was that we were probably a decade into digitizing healthcare. So at last we were getting enough patient data to train these networks and to discover the patterns I'm describing. So yes, there have been great innovations in the design of these neural networks, but many people think, the big things were getting access to raw computer power and getting access to the training data. And on the back of that, you've mentioned ChatGPT, which has appeared only 2 months ago and already, caused academic journals to have position statements on non-human authors and whether that's good or not. Schools and universities have banned the use of this for the production of essays. Actually, our university issued a guidance yesterday and said, well, we just have to live with it. And you have to find a new way of doing things. I was listening to our Australian government parliament on the way home the other day, just by accident as I was skipping through, and our Attorney General, who is the chief legal officer for the country, was giving a speech on AGI, artificial general intelligence, and halfway through his speech he said, I need to let you know that last night I asked ChatGPT what I should say, and the whole speech I've given you so far has been generated by computer. And it was fantastic.
Was he really telling the truth, or was he joking?
Yeah. No, he wasn't joking.
That's remarkable. I was gonna say another anecdote about chat was I learned that when you finish your medical school, you have to take a final exam to qualify or certify as a doctor, and chat passed the exam. So chat technically became a doctor.
Is there any conceivable way in which that's good news? Sounds to me like it's.
It sort of is and it sort of is not. Technology, I like to think, is being neutral, and it's the human uses of technology which are the concern. So from the point of view of healthcare, so ChatGPT for your listeners is what's called a large language model. In other words, they've fed the neural network with literally billions of words and text from the web, and it's built a model of how people speak. So I like to say that it's a great storyteller, but it's not a truth teller. So just by knowing how people speak about things, it often gets things right, but it actually is not knowledgeable in that sense. So you can ask ChatGPT for something and it'll give you an answer that's truthy, to use that American phrase. And it'll be articulate and polished, and it often gets things right. So consumers, for example, instead of doing a Google search, will, I'm sure in the next few months, speak to or type a question in, maybe to Google. They just released 2 days ago their version of ChatGPT, so there's a bit of a war going on now. Microsoft will incorporate it into its search. So the way we look for information will change, and instead of getting a list of links, we're going to get an answer. Now, I don't know if you remember, but before Google, there was something called Ask Jeeves, which was a very early search engine. And the idea then was the same thing, where you would just try and give a question to the computer and it would just tell you what it thinks the answer is. But ChatGPT and all those language models can write essays, write limericks, write songs. A great Australian musician, Nick Cave, who you may or may not know, calls it an abomination because people asked it to write songs in his style, and of course it did. And so it really challenges the nature of what it means to be an artist if computers can mimic you. But so back to the point of healthcare, it allows people potentially, if well done, to access information in a way that's crafted for them to understand. And we're meant to be talking about the pandemic. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic was that there was a literal explosion in research. Thousands and thousands of preprint articles that had not been peer reviewed were just deposited by people because it was so urgent that we needed to get the results out. And being able to look at all that volume of research that had not been peer reviewed yet or was in the process of peer review, and working out what's important and not, that's kind of a crisis thing that no human could really do. And we're, for example, interested in building what we call automated systematic review technologies. In other words, computers that can sift through documents to try and answer a specific research question. So that's a different story to ChatGPT, which just will tell you a nice story. In healthcare, we actually have to tell you the right story. And that's a slightly harder ask. So I can see positive benefits. My biggest worry right now is misinformation. We saw throughout the pandemic, the anti-vax movement grew very much driven by what was happening in social media. So Facebook, etc., we know was designed to use AI and machine learning to essentially drive people to quite polarized views, because that would generate lots of interaction on Facebook, and that would drive their revenue model. But the consequence in society was people tend to polarize into very small groups. And having a ChatGPT technology means that a malicious actor, it could be a state actor, can literally flood the internet with lots of plausible versions of misinformation. So, if you were wanting to change an election, you just keep on creating lots of very plausible tweets or Facebook posts, then it becomes an arms race about message control. So I think we're in the very early days of misinformation, and these technologies worry me a lot in terms of their capacity for misuse. And there's always people on the good side trying to find ways of filtering that out. But the societal cost already of the anti-vax movement, or what's happened in recent elections in all countries, not just the United States, driven by this sort of social media misinformation is concerning, especially because we know international state actors participated in trying to shift the results in other countries. So that's some of the negative side of it all.
Yeah, I would find a fascinating application in helping us sort out long COVID. There are now a list of 200 symptoms of long COVID. Can't all be one disease or one illness. There are lots of theories. There's lots of publications, papers. So trying to sift through all that to see if there's a common thread somewhere that can define the long COVID syndrome in some way, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, okay, I'll get the guys to do it today. It's an interesting challenge, and I suspect part of the problem with long COVID is that we still don't have all the right things measured.
Right.
And so we're left with proxies like fever and cough, etc., which are interesting, but may not give us the sort of granularity that you'd want to work out some of those different phenotypes, as we say, different causes. Yeah, but I'm sure that's something people are working on. But it'll be cracked in this way, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we just need to come up with a common case definition everybody can agree on as to what.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it? What are we measuring? One way or the other. Yeah, it's a challenge. Been interesting to watch it evolve, and it's going to take a little while for science to sort itself out.
Yeah.
One of my interests regarding pandemics is detection, early detection of pandemic. And I wonder if you've given some thought to applications that might help us detect an unusual event that might become a pandemic, or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. We did some work about a year or two ago looking at the way AI had been used in the COVID pandemic, just trying to review the different tasks that it was used for. And the first task was signaling pandemic risk. And there is a program called Health Map, which is run by the Boston Children's Hospital. And it's basically uses AI to read news feeds, to read social media, essentially to look for signals in people's behavior and what they're reporting, and to see if there are early clusters. And people say that Health Map detected the COVID pandemic first. So it was seeing signals in social media in China that were suggesting that there was something happening in that population before people mentioned it. And I think there's a Canadian model, it was called Blue Dot, which I don't know too much about, but just a few days later also detected the same kind of signal. So I think one of the things we learned through the pandemic was that there are soft data out there that actually are meaningful and that we never really had access to before. And being able to surveil the way people are talking about their health, it is an interesting early signal. It's not precise, but and you don't want to obviously be over alerting. But I don't know if that was something you're familiar with, Ronald, or had thought about.
Yeah, just a bit of background. Back in the late 90s, due to a couple of scares we had in Canada, I won't go into, we thought Canada needed an early warning of things that might be imported from around the world, given that you could come get anywhere in the world in 24 hours while you're incubating something that might create an outbreak of disease wherever you arrive. And we thought the early internet could help somehow find the information we were looking for. However, at that time, in the late 90s, the fastest search engine was going to take one whole month to make a pass. And
right, yeah.
What we landed on was, we wanted stuff in 5 minutes. What we landed on was reading RSS feeds from media, which is a lot of, and created the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, or GPHIN it's called. Now, that's pretty archaic technology because we used a taxonomy to search words. And then we needed to have people who would then take a look at the events and decide whether something was critical or not. But if you have AI to look at not only at the sources like newsprint, but also looking at the mammoth source of social media jabber that's going on around the world. Plus, you add to that the idea of I've always felt that it's an astute clinician that often tells us there's something unusual going on and it needs to be followed up. So how you tap into a network of astute clinicians, I'm not sure. But certainly tapping into news media and social media is the way to go. And AI, I think, can do the job much faster and better than humans can do it.
Yeah, and I think that was the lesson in COVID, is that you can do it. And it's interesting. It's called COVID-19. It's now 2023. 4 years has passed since it started, or the outbreak started, and AI has moved so fast in the last 4 years. So I'm not the only academic who was surprised by ChatGPT. We've known about these large language models, and we've known that they're coming, but to just be faced with the sophistication of the conversational capacity of this technology, it really was, more sophisticated and more capable than we thought would be possible at this time. So if ChatGPT is out there, Google has things in-house, Meta has things in-house. There are lots of companies that will be doing things in the next few years. So I think everything that we could do in 2019 is already ancient history.
Are you saying that some computer system or AI system picked up COVID before that doctor in China who blew the whistle and then died?
Yep.
So it's before
Yep.
that, really? Oh,
Yep.
But now how come it didn't become public knowledge before he took that great risk of announcing it?
I'm not sure. I think they may have even published their alerts at the time, but it's also a matter of days, So yeah, but I presume even a couple of days is a lot of warning to get going.
Mhm.
To me, another interesting aspect is to look at seemingly unrelated situations that might create conditions for a pandemic. It's a little bit of an idea of AI forecasting. For example, if there is a dramatic change in the climate in certain areas, and there is a movement of pathogens into those areas, is there a potential? So do you think that you can get into sort of a risk assessment, risk prediction mode with AI?
Oh, look, you could do it with standard stats, and you've actually mentioned a really interesting topic that my community is only recently started to think about, which is climate change and digital health. So in December, I edited a special issue of the American Journal of Informatics around climate change, and that involves AI and other things. And in terms of the contribution of AI, one of the big things is to do exactly what you say, which is to monitor change in the movement of vector species like malaria and mosquitoes, that sort of thing. So we can see in Australia, for example, things like Ross River fever moving south as things heat up. And I'm sure across the North American continent, you're going to have changes in those vectors or the diseases themselves. So being able to model and detect changes is clearly a part of what we could be doing. And I think, the bigger story is that to survive COVID, and we're still in the middle of COVID, I'm always surprised when people say we're post-pandemic.
Yeah.
It's still live. It's still live.
Politically, it was declared over.
Exactly. Yeah. Same here. But it's taken a heroic response to get to this point. It's burnt out many clinicians, and societies pay quite a large cost during lockdowns, etc. Climate change is going to bring us these events on a regular basis. The idea that we're going to have one pandemic and we'll just get over it is not the world we live in. So we're going to have new pandemics because of shifting patterns of climate. We're going to have floods, heat events, smoke events, cold events. All of these things, are massively challenging to society, and each is a shock to the health system. So the big question for us now is, how do we re-engineer healthcare to be resilient enough to deal with all these things that are going to come to it? If we do another COVID response, we're not going to have many doctors and nurses left willing to play. It's just going to be too hard. Mm. So AI is not the solution, but it's part of our armaments. And I gave you that example of screening for mammograms before. So there will be things that we will delegate to AI just because we have to. And I think what we're trying to do now is to understand the nature of how we adapt as a health system and society quickly to new crises, and that's a whole new ballgame, as they say, and stretches the thinking.
One thing I read, I think today, said something about the way you would detect, I don't know, putting people through an MRI or something. They switched to using AI to detect and diagnose the condition instead of using this X-ray equipment, which was going to give the next patient the disease.
It's certainly the case that AI is being used in radiology. for all sorts of images, for everything from ultrasounds to CT scans and MRIs. It can do it. We ourselves have built AIs to read X-rays to diagnose COVID. That's a very standard thing now. You can do that. We actually have a very interesting project which is diagnosing COVID based on cough. So you can distinguish, but just based on the kind of cough you've got, whether you've got COVID or not, very well. So
The
just
sound?
the sound, yeah.
Oh.
So the idea is you cough into your smartphone, and you know it's performing better than a lot of these swab tests that we have. You know, not PCR, which is very accurate, but so you know that's the sort of thing that you wouldn't have imagined. But there you go.
Yeah.
How many places are there like you in the world? I mean, your whole institute or department is focusing on developing AI technology for medicine.
That's right.
How many other people in the world are doing that? And are you? Is there any kind of collaboration, or do you know who's doing what, so you don't wind up doing the same thing?
Yeah. Look, things have changed a lot. If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said in Australia we were the only one. Now every university has one of me. You know, there's a professor of informatics or digital health or something. Across North America, you know, every large US university has a strong informatics or biomedical informatics group, all working on different things. So the field has exploded really in the last decade. And that's interesting to me too. You know, in one way, it's lovely to have success that you can see your field burgeon, but there's also a lot more competition, which cuts to your second point, which is around collaboration. And there are collaborations around medical AI. So there are groups where different labs and centers do share information. We have a national alliance here with about 100 organizational members. And it's not just universities, it's industry, which is a great source of innovation. It's health service providers, clinicians. That it's not just a technology piece. It's got to be all about people with problems and needs who help us understand how to help them. The last thing we want is lots of computer scientists creating algorithms that look great but don't actually change one patient outcome. That will be a failure of technology. So it's a big area now. And even though you said informatics is a funny word, and I've hated it since my career started, but it's the thing. It's the thing.
I'm just I'm not an expert in the field of AI for sure, but it occurs to me I'm sure you're familiar with the International Bank of Genetic Sequences for Viruses, and I'm wondering if there's a bank for software programs for AI. Do people bank their programs and say, "Hey, look what we've done"?
Look, it's a really interesting question. So this is a bit about the open source movement, which is about publishing your software in a way that others can access it.
Right.
So we would like that to happen. One of the interesting reasons for doing what you say is what we call replication or replicability. Mm-hmm. It's a big thing in health research, as I'm sure you're aware. That just because somebody publishes a study and a result doesn't mean it's true. Yeah. They might have made a mistake. They might have been biased to want to get a certain answer because of a financial conflict of interest. And in my field of AI, people get their own data, write their own algorithms, publish a result, and nobody checks your homework. Nobody checks to see if that was true or not. So one of the drivers is to have these open repositories, of data, patient data, so everybody can test their systems on the same data, and also the algorithms they did. So we are moving to that. We're not doing enough of it. And to complicate the issue, the big companies, the Googles of this world, the Microsofts, publish their own software and make it open to people. So that kind of attaches people to the company's technologies and may not necessarily be as open as we would like. So it's a very complex space, and especially in AI, what might have been a very academic pursuit is now, a multi-billion or trillion-dollar enterprise, and there's there are a lot of drivers to this being closed shop, because that'll make companies more competitive. So a really interesting landscape, very complex.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think the public sometimes has a hard time understanding that science is iterative, that what seems true today may not be true tomorrow, as more information is developed, collated, analyzed, and so on. So I imagine the same thing can apply with certain algorithms in AI. Well, maybe they do work under certain circumstances, but not always. And then we can, the next round will be a little bit better, and the next round will be better than that.
That's right.
But
it's an interesting. Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that we're starting to grapple with is that just because the AI works in Hospital A in Canada doesn't mean it's going to work in another hospital, even in the US, because the populations are different, different blends of ethnicity, different socioeconomic status, different disease patterns, different ways of practicing medicine. So we call this the transportability problem. So it's harder in our space because it's not just that people may have made a mistake in the research. It's just that things may not work for perfectly valid reasons in a new setting. A drug should still work, presumably, across large populations. But when you build these health service interventions, they're very hostage to local conditions.
Mm-hmm.
I read that you were a member of the Pandemic Working Group for the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, which is one of the broader international artificial intelligence organizations. I'm wondering if you might speak a bit about what they're working on and what GPAI is.
Right. So GPAI was put together, I think, under the OECD to try and bring together some rapid response to the pandemic. And up until last year, I was part of the pandemic urgent response subgroup. And I've got to say that was an interesting but challenging experience because we had an urgent pandemic happening out there, and it was very difficult to get people whose skill set was computer science and algorithms to get into the mindset of population and public health or clinical response. So there was a great focus on creating libraries of software that you could use, etc. And there was a healthy debate in the group about what we should be doing. So I'd be saying, look, guys, people are dying out there. What can we do today to help? And others were saying, look, our job is to be more retrospective, to see if we can give general guidance. And I think there are a lot of lessons around how best to utilize those skills. I'm not sure that we made much of a difference to the pandemic, but I think that was a learning experience. And certainly I would reconvene that group again, but with more experience, we would do a different thing. So it was very interesting. And I think those sorts of groups actually probably do better at more general things. So one of the big things have been the articulation of ethical principles of the use of AI. What is appropriate? What is the safe use of AI? Mm-hmm. And not just in healthcare, but in the military, etc. And that's where GPAI has probably been really strong, I think.
I think you wrote an article about that, whether AIs in medical context should follow the Hippocratic Oath. I found that quite an interesting prospect.
That's right. So what are the ethics of AI? thing I always say is, people are probably familiar, if they're a science fiction reader, with Isaac Asimov and his I, Robot series, and then the four rules that all robots have to follow, which is essentially, don't harm people, don't kill people, do what you're told, but if being told, and don't commit genocide is also snuck in there, which I think is useful for all robots to know. And I often say, and although it's a cheeky thing, I say, but a clinical AI would break all of those rules if it did its job. So the example is end of life. So, in the last couple of weeks of life, many people end up, unfortunately, in hospital, and that's the wrong place for them to be. They need to be probably at home with their loved ones. They don't need heroic intensive care. They need the tubes pulled out and to be comfortable. And that's a decision to be made. And if you make that decision to remove care, you're allowing somebody to die. I've broken the Asimov rules. So we have algorithms now which are very good at predicting whether or not you're about to die in hospital. Really, really accurate, I've got to say. And so what is the ethics of using that algorithm to make a decision to withdraw care? So a very complex ethical space.
Do you let the AI system make its own decision? I mean, do you build in the
Well, we don't now, do we?
You don't? I don't know. I'm asking what you do. Do you turn it loose?
Well,
or do you say, you ask me next time you have a question?
Yeah. So those decisions are decisions made by the person involved, by their family and carers, with guidance from their clinical team. But if a clinical team now relies on the technology to push them to making one recommendation or the other, there's an ethical balance there around, is it appropriate to design that AI to give that advice? I think it's manifestly obviously useful to know that. Clinicians already are very clear usually what's going to happen anyway, but it might be, for example, that the AI says, look, this patient's 35, and although they look really ill, their probability of death is only 30%. They've got a good chance. So you need to work hard and go. In which case, you might be harming the patient. They're going to ICU, they're getting painful treatments, they're on a respirator. These are really awful things to do to somebody, but we do them with the prospect of survival. So again, that breaks an Asimov law. It now inflicts harm, or short-term harm anyway, for long-term benefit. So these are the bioethical challenges around AI and healthcare, and these are just very trite examples to try and get you thinking about the complexities of it all.
But I can certainly imagine a computer with AI algorithms that, first of all, evaluates your pulmonary status, your renal status, your cardiac status, your mental status, and matches that against a data set. And here's a probability.
Yeah, we do that.
Yeah.
It's 99 point something% usually accurate.
Do it with a little more precision than the physician who says, "I got a feeling," based on experience and knowledge. But but the AI is data-based.
That's right.
But I see it as a tool to help the family and the physician, not as a decision maker.
I think that's the safe framing of how to use it. However, somebody has had to design that algorithm with the knowledge that it might shift a decision, and so there's the ethical challenge.
Yeah, I realize. Yeah.
Very interesting.
How good is the algorithm?
Well, is it the right thing to build the algorithm?
Right.
There are also interests that, I've heard of cases where the hospital says, now look here, this person's been on a machine for 40 years. That's long enough. And then the family keeps saying, no, don't turn it off. I guess real practical cost benefit analysis plays into real decisions anyway, ethical decisions that people make, not just a problem for the designer of the AI system. Huh?
Yeah, look, these are simply going from things that in principle we did to now becoming pervasive. And I think now that it's becoming pervasive, and these algorithms are everywhere. People are looking at this with new eyes. Another good example of an issue is algorithmic bias, which people talk about a lot. For example, algorithms might suggest what sort of treatment you should get, or what your chances of survival are. So one well-known bias is the algorithm will end up recommending based on how the world is. So people from one socioeconomic group or one ethnic group might have very poor health outcomes for reasons around inequity. But the algorithm doesn't know that. It says, oh, look, if I see a patient like that, they're not going to do well, so they're not going to get treatment. So what it's doing is just hardwiring a social bias. So it's a big issue. Training an AI that will recognize a skin cancer, if all it's ever seen is Caucasian shots of the cancer, it's going to be really poor at diagnosing somebody who's got different colored skin, and that's another bias. They're going to get poor quality care because it doesn't understand how to look at this disease in a different population. So those biases are another issue that concern the ethicists. It's a complex world we're into.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I want to go back to the profitability issue. Who's going to own all of this stuff? Somebody, you mentioned Google and Meta and so on, that now are producing these things. This has to be a profit-making operation. Somebody's going to make a buck, and somebody's going to own the algorithms, and somebody's going to own, and how are they going to charge rates for diagnostics, or how's the economics of medicine going to be affected by the use of this thing? And I'm in a way and mentally comparing it to what we do with the pharmaceutical industry, which I think many of us would have some complaints about, because certainly some of these companies are ripping off, the public in a big way by making. I think Biden last night talked about how in his State of the Union speech that that they were charging $300 for insulin when it costs $12 to make. And so they're going to put a lid on that. Well, high time. So they should. But there will be some comparable, economic issues that I suppose arise when it comes to who's going to control what. What do you see as coming out of this in terms of the financing of medicine?
Yeah, look, this is a really, really interesting question, and I don't have the answer, because I think companies are trying to work out how they make a buck out of it. I mentioned how some of the big tech companies are currently giving away their software in open source to get people using their systems. So right now you can buy one of the giant electronic record company record systems. So when you go to a hospital, you'll see there's a computer and somebody's entering information into the electronic record. And those companies allow you to build your own algorithms based on this system. So it might be that in one model, it's the local organizations that build their own algorithms and keep them up to date. That could happen. Or it could be that somebody tries to sell them, but I talk about something called algorithmic sovereignty. In other words, it's important for nations to have control of the algorithms that run their country. If you've got foreign actors creating the software that runs your electricity grid, your transport grid, your water supply, you don't really know what's in the software. So there are sort of societal risks from not having capability. And I think in healthcare, I talk about Australia, for example. I don't know if this is Canadian experience, but we're great exporters of primary products. We'll export wool, and then we'll import the suits made from the wool. We don't add value, and the risk is that we'll be exporting all our patient data and importing the value-added algorithms back from other countries, and I think you then become hostage to them. Not just in terms of the financial implications, but also to the biases, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a strong argument to try and bring algorithm development down to as much of the local as possible. We'll see. Let's talk about this in a year, Meta.
But isn't it feasible that I'm a company and I've developed an algorithm for reading X-rays and discarding the normals, as you put it, and I come to the hospital and I say, I've got an algorithm, read your X-rays just in a flash, doctor, and it'll cost you.
Yeah, so I think the model there more often is that they're selling the box, they're selling the X-ray machine, and saying it's a smart X-ray machine, and these are the things it can do. Right. I remember many years ago when I was working at Hewlett Packard Research Labs, we were working on making their bedside monitors, those machines that go beep, and making them smart. And so we were putting AI. This is back in the early 90s, putting AI into the patient bedside monitors and the ICU monitors. And they would go to the customers and say, how much will you pay for this smart version of HP CareView? And customers would say, well, we're not going to pay any extra because we expect the next generation of your technology to be smart. So it may well be that you'll be getting AI as part of the package of the CT scanner you buy, as part of the medical record you buy, and that is just a natural evolution of the market. But there might also be models where those companies allow other third parties to put their algorithms in and they can charge them. Who knows? It's going to be interesting. I always love the HP printer model where we sell you the printer for less than cost, but then charge you for the ink, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's clearly a field that is evolving quickly, very quickly.
What kind of work is your group doing now? Do you have a particular goal that you're working on that hasn't quite developed yet, and that you can tell us a hot secret about what you're going to do next?
Sure. So we've got 4 groups, and one that we haven't talked much about is the group that works on AI safety. So this is about trying to understand how you would build these systems in a way that would do no harm. So that's really interesting. We're actually right now, you mentioned ChatGPT, so we're in a scramble to try to understand what its capabilities are. So I think someone mentioned earlier that it did pretty well on a set of medical questions from an exam. I don't think it actually passed the exam, but I think it was given questions from it and it did pretty well. So we're trying to understand how accurate is the information that it's providing patients. That's the sort of thing we're looking at. Is it safe? Is it safe? Because we've in the past looked at Google, let's say, and other search engines, and typing in things like, I want to kill myself, I'm suicidal, to see what sort of results you get back. And some search engines in the past would
will
say,
it teach you how to do it? Is that the idea, or what are you?
Or does it say, if you are concerned, here's the number you should call for help right now, which is the appropriate response. If you get somebody who's potentially suicidal and you know it, then you direct them immediately to frontline resources to help. And so, in some of the search engines we found, they did exactly that. They were beautifully engineered, and others, misdirected you, So that's the sort of thing that is of great concern. And we're just also very interested in, this whole discussion today has been about hospitals and doctors. In the future, most of the tools are going to be owned and used by us as patients or carers or family members.
Mhm.
So one of our groups is very focused on this consumer side of understanding what those tools look like. We say that the patient work is hidden work. Nobody really talks about all the hard work that's involved in being a patient. So if you're a insulin dependent diabetic, you talked about insulin, then there's a lot of work you do every day to stay well. We study the work of doctors and nurses. Nobody really pays much attention to helping the work of patients. And we're very interested in families too. So we had a paper just mid last year saying, really, we should be building tools to help families support each other. So we know in a family, it's often the mum for some reason who becomes the owner of the healthcare problem. In some families with aged parents, that there are changing responsibilities. Could we build a dashboard for the family to see where everybody is, to see how well people are, to prioritize healthcare tasks, to be able to provide access to information, to know if mum or dad opened the fridge and ate yesterday, why are my parents in bed all day? Why haven't they got out? All those things you can do from sensors. So it's not Big Brother. It's about trying to create tools for us to become better managers of our own lives. And we talked about, a stressed health system in COVID. We've talked about climate change bringing future stresses to the health system. There's no question that machines and we as patients are going to take up the slack that the health system can't help us with anymore. Those are going to be the only two levers we've got, really, self-reliance, machines, or help from the health system.
Well, I think that's, I use Google all the time to diagnose myself. If I have a pimple or I have, a cough or something, I check and see what does this mean, but how much better is it going to get? Am I going to actually see an improvement in my self-diagnosis when I begin using this Chat GPT or whatever it's called, better than just looking up on Google? And will physicians be using? Will my doctor go check with GPT before she calls me to answer my question, etc.?
Look at it. Yeah, it's very interesting. So I look at, and we talk about ChatGPT. It's not a health technology. It's not trained to do that job, and so I wouldn't recommend anybody rely on it in its current version for anything other than playing with it for interest. But I don't doubt that within the next few years we will see healthcare-specific versions of these large language models appear, and they will be very good. Look, doctors today already do that. There's no question that there's no way any good doctor can keep in their head all of the latest research. You just can't do that. And so good medical practice is to go and make sure that you're up to date. Mm-hmm. And in the past, you might have gone to a course, you might have done some reading from your journal. Now we search well-known resources, but we search, and we train our medical students to not just be knowledgeable. They can't know everything. We teach them how to find out what they need to know. It's the modern skill. So it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. If I see my doctor tapping away and looking at something, I feel comfortable that they understand they have limits. It's not the other way around. And look, you mentioned self-diagnosis, but most of our work as patients is between moments of diagnosis. The diagnosis is just a moment in your journey, and we tend to focus on it so heavily, but it's everything before and after that really is the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm. How's it going to change the the working life of doctors. I mean, the whole profession. I presume if so much of the work can be given over to machines, that it's going to affect the job market. It's going to affect the whole structure of the profession. Is this happening already, or are you getting geared up for in expectation of these changes?
Yeah. So early on, people were saying that AI was going to put doctors out of work, and we now know that's nonsense. If you look at what we would call the unmet need out there, in other words, all those patients who have problems, who are not getting the care they need, there's more than enough work to be done. And so the future looks like doctors and nurses and physiotherapists, etc., all the health professionals are going to be working with the technology to be far more effective and touch more patients than before. It's not that we're going to be out of a job, it's that we're going to be doing a different job. Some wag said a while ago that if you're a doctor and AI puts you out of a job, then you deserve to go.
Okay, did anybody else have any more issues that you want to handle before we close this tonight?
My head is spinning. I've had enough. Thank you.
Well, just let me add, it's been a great pleasure to meet you and discuss some of these things with you.
Certainly has.
Good.
Thank you very, very much. I feel now I'm really smart. I've got it all controlled. Thank you so much, and good wishes for your adventures with AI. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye.